Selfish bitch, Brett muttered under his breath. More? The pretty waitress asked, emphasizing her question by raising the coffee pot in her hand. Brett looked at his watch. No. I have to go now. He took one last sip of what was left in his cup, left $2 on the table, paid the bill, and walked out. He had an appointment with Terry, his soon-to-be ex-wife. The selfish bitch. He couldn't believe she thought she was entitled to the Continental. It had taken him over 2 years to rebuild the thing. Oh, sure, she'd had a little help, but this car had belonged to him from the moment he'd seen it. It was his baby, his pride, and joy. And now she wanted to take it away from him. Selfish bitch. Pulling up to his former driveway, he was a little surprised to see that she hadn't put the house up for sale yet. They hadn't lived there long enough to have accumulated any real equity. Maybe 10 Oregon 15000, but neither of them wanted to continue living there, so they had decided to sell the house and split the profits. It was all very civilized. In fact, as far as divorces go, Brett and Terry had everything as civilized as it could ever be. Everything except the car, it was a 1960 Continental Mark V town car. Brett had seen it one day in the backyard of an old farmhouse while driving through Indiana. It was just like the one his dad had when he was a kid. He wasn't usually a fan of classic cars, but there was something special about this one. Brett stopped to talk to the farmer. He told the old gray-haired man in bib overalls that he'd be glad to get this old car off the property for free, but the farmer wasn't stupid. He knew damn well the car was worth several $1,000, even as it was. They haggled and finally came to a consensus, but before Brett could spend that kind of money, he'd have to talk to his wife. What do you know about restoring old cars? She asked. Nothing, but I can learn, he replied. Over the next few days, they discussed it, but Terry wasn't convinced. It was a lot of money. What if he lost interest in this old thing? What then? Would they be able to sell it and get their money back? Or would it just rust away in their backyard instead of the farmer? Brett had already done some investigation and assured her that there was no way they could lose the money. Even if he didn't do anything with it, he could sell the car in its current condition for more than they paid. In the end, it was her husband's enthusiasm that sealed the deal. With his wife's blessing, Brett arranged for the car to be delivered. A week later, when Terry saw it being unloaded from the platform, she changed her mind. But it was too late. They were the proud owners of a rusty old pile of scrap metal. I know it doesn't look so good now, honey, but I'm going to bring it back to life. I'm going to make it young again, he said with a wide smile. Terry had always had faith in her husband. In her opinion, he couldn't do much if he didn't want to, so she decided right away that she would support and help him in any way she could. Of course, that was many years ago. Now the Continental was the proverbial line drawn in the sand of a failed marriage. Selfish bitch. He muttered to himself as he got out of the car and headed for home. He felt a little strange. This was the first time he'd been back since he'd left almost 5 months ago. He couldn't help but be a little saddened as he walked down the flat stone steps leading up to the porch. He and Terry had worked so hard to lay them just right. Oh, he knew divorce was the best decision for both of them. Terry felt the same way. Hell, it was the one thing they'd both agreed on for ages. Still, they'd had many wonderful years together. Brett was just raising his hand to knock when the front door opened. He had almost forgotten how beautiful she was. "Hi, Brett. Come on in," she said, stepping aside with a smile. For a moment, he forgot why he was here. The smile started to break free before he suddenly remembered the car. He immediately went on the offensive. "Terry, I can't believe you think you're entitled to the Continental. What the hell would you do with it if you had it?" Oh, wait, Brett," she interjected, "let's talk about this over a cup of coffee. I've just brewed a fresh pot of tea." Her pleasant smile and calm demeanor were disarming. What the hell, he thought she always made the best coffee in town. Why not? He began to relax a little as Terry poured him a cup of beer. It felt good, cozy to be in his own kitchen again. He couldn't help it. He watched her from behind as she walked over to the counter and put the kettle back in place. He remembered how smooth and shapely her ass had been under the short skirt she wore. A slight smile appeared on his face as he took his first sip of the hot black nectar. She returned to the table and sat down with her cup of coffee. "Now," she said, looking him in the eye, "what makes you think I'm not entitled to the Continental?" So far, the conversation was not going the way he had envisioned. He was all worked up, he'd come loaded for bear, ready for a fight, but there was absolutely no aggression in her voice. He'd thought they'd be yelling at each other by now, but then they'd never really yelled at each other. Even when they decided to divorce, the conversations had been polite and considerate, but she'd never talked about taking his car before. Brett studied the look on her face. She was always hard to understand, but it sounded like she was willing to negotiate. Maybe she would listen to the voice of reason. Maybe there wouldn't be a fight. He would just state his case logically. When he's done, she'll come to the only reasonable conclusion: the car belongs to him. "Terry, if you remember, I was the one who bought this car in the first place. I did all the work on it." Wait a minute," she interjected again. "The money for this car came out of our savings. I put as much money into this account as you did. I'd say we split the cost of the car, wouldn't you?" She was right. They both put the same amount of money in the savings account every month, and yet, he did all the work. "And what do you mean? He did all the work?" She continued. "Yes. You did most of the physical stuff, but who spent hour after hour after hour after hour on the computer, keeping track of all the details? That's got to mean something." Damn. He thought another point in her favor. This wasn't going at all the way he'd expected. She wasn't done yet either. "Sometimes I've even helped you with the car itself." "Not very often," he interjected, deciding he'd scored one for himself. "Maybe not. We both know I'm not a mechanic, and a lot of it was too demanding for me. I just didn't have the energy to help. But even then, I was there for you, giving you moral support." He had to admit that she really did. "How many times had I massaged your neck and shoulders when you got upset, or kissed your boo-boo when the wrench slipped?" Brett took another sip of coffee. He couldn't help but smile as his thoughts wandered back in time. God. Life had been so much fun back then. It seemed like all they did was laugh and have a good time together. He missed those days. Back then, who would have thought they would end up in divorce court? Brett sighed. Enough indulging in memories, he thought, returning to the task at hand. "Terry, come on. You've never even driven this car. The couple times I tried to get you behind the wheel, you said it would be like driving a tank and you didn't want to risk scratching it. Everything happens the first time sometime, Brett. Maybe you can ride with me the first time just to make sure I drive okay." God, he thought, what bloody nerves. Not only does she want to take my car, but she wants me to teach her how to drive it. "Tell you what," he countered. "How about I come down on the weekends and give you a ride?" "How about you?" she asked with a smile. "Sure. How many times?" "I don't know. Probably as many times as you want, you know, as long as I don't have any other plans," Terry said, showing that she was thinking about it. "Does that mean I'm getting a car?" Brett said a little gustily. "No. I was just asking," she teased. "Come on, Terry. Hell, if I'd known we were going to fight over this, I would put it in the property agreement and let the judge decide. I just thought it would be a mistaken conclusion and that I would keep the car. I never thought you would want to do that." "Wanna bring back bad memories?" "Bad memories?" she asked, looking a little puzzled. "Like what?" "Well, we did a lot of messing around in that car. Remember how we christened the back seat?" "You mean the one I looked for 3 months before I found one that wasn't all torn and worn out?" Damn, he thought. She's scoring points left and right. "Yes. That," he admitted. "Of course, I remember by then, he'd already driven. We drove up to the lake. You said you wanted to demonstrate how much room there was in the back." "There was there too," she said with a chuckle. "Hell, We fucked in almost every conceivable position, but it's certainly not a bad memory. What makes you think that? Well, I mean, because of the way you're treating me right now, I just think you probably wish none of this ever happened. Is that how you feel? You wish none of this had ever happened? Brett was surprised. He thought he could hear the sadness in her voice. A few months ago, when they had discussed divorce, there had been no sadness in her voice. She sounded like she couldn't wait to get rid of him. No, honestly, those were some of the happiest days of my life, but then I don't understand, Brett. Why should they be happy memories for you and not me? She asked. Well, I don't know. I guess it's because I know you treat me differently. Differently than I treat you, I mean. I know. Maybe we should talk about it before the divorce is final. How do you feel about me? Brett really didn't want to go into detail. He was embarrassed. He didn't want to admit that he still loved her, especially since he knew she no longer reciprocated him. Come on, Terry. I came to talk about the car. Let's not talk about that. Damn. She cursed to herself. He could be so frustrating sometimes. Great. Terry said, getting up to pour herself another cup of coffee. It's in my garage. You know what they say about possession being 9/10 of the law, she grinned. Damn it, Terry. You agreed to keep it here until I could find a place to store it. You know damn well, I can't just leave it in the parking lot outside my house. He was starting to get angry. She didn't want this. I know she gave in. That's not what I meant. It's just what? Brett was getting upset now. Is just what, Terry? I wanna know what you meant about my bad memories. Do you think I hate you? Brett sighed slightly. It didn't sound like he was going to avoid this conversation. I don't know. Maybe you don't hate me, but you've made it very clear that you don't love me anymore, so it goes without saying that you might think of those memories with regret. That's all. Well, I don't regret them. I don't regret anything about our time together. Should she have said that? She was trying to draw him out. She needed to know his true feelings, but to do that, it looked like she would have to commit to it first. She decided to go ahead and say it. I don't hate you either. In fact, the only thing I regret is the breakup. Brett couldn't believe his ears. Did she just say she regretted breaking up? What the hell? She was the one who said they were estranged, that they no longer had anything in common. Terry, you're the one who said it would be better if we divorce and went our separate ways. Remember? Yeah. I remember. Although I don't remember you disagreeing with me, well, I guess, I don't know, we just didn't seem like the same loving couple anymore. I know we were both guilty of doing what many others do. After a while, we started to take each other for granted. Yes. I suppose that's true. But it wasn't just that, Terry. We hardly ever made love anymore. Do you remember how we were in the beginning? God, we couldn't keep our hands off each other, especially when we worked on the Continental. Heck, we had fun working on it together. He had to smile again. And this time, he had to fight back tears as a tsunami of great memories flooded his mind. I have to agree. Terry replied. We were a real team. Remember the first time we washed him? Brett grinned. Yeah. But as I recall, we hardly washed the car at all. We were too busy hosing each other down. His soon-to-be ex confirmed with a chuckle of her own. I don't think I've laughed so hard since I was a little girl. Yeah. We had some great times, that's for sure. But as soon as we were done with the car, we started drifting apart. It wasn't right after we were done. We still had fun after that. I remember driving it up to your mother's house and seeing her face when she saw it. Yeah, she remembered right away. It was just like your father's Continental when he died. She actually had tears in her eyes when we took her for a walk. Terry recalled. You're right. Brett admitted. We had a lot of fun in that car even after it was finished. He remembered that time fondly for a moment. So where did it all go wrong? Terry asked, interrupting his train of thought. You're telling me that you seemed to have all the answers when you brought up the divorce. he replied sharply. Brett, I was just expressing what we were both thinking at the time. Come on, neither of us were really working on this marriage. The reality of life seemed to get in the way all the time. You became more interested in your buddies than you were in me. Terry, I only spent so much time with them because you checked on Audrey every chance you got. I got tired of being alone in the house, so I started dating guys. What did you expect? I'm not sure, she replied. I knew we were having problems, but I didn't know what to do. I started going to Audrey's all the time, so I wouldn't have to deal with our marriage being in trouble. It was my sanctuary. Well, it seemed to me that you were losing interest in me as well as the marriage. I always thought it was because you had fallen out of love with me. We started making love less and less often, and when we did, it seemed like we no longer had the same passion. Terry thought about what he had said. Yes. I remember not being as excited about making love as I was in the beginning. I'm not exactly sure why, but I know it wasn't because I didn't love you anymore. It just seemed old, routine. Like, we did it because that's what married people are supposed to do, but neither of us had carnal desires for each other like we did in the beginning. What we should have done was find ways to liven it up a bit. Keep it fresh. So why didn't we do that? Brett asked. Good question. If we had, maybe we wouldn't be here now, a month after the dissolution of our marriage. Silence hung in the air as they both sipped their coffee. Brett thought deeply. He wondered what it all meant. At first, she had told him that she wanted to talk to him about keeping Continental, but mostly they had talked about their marriage. He was beginning to think that she didn't need the car at all, that it was just an excuse to take him there. Terry was thinking the same thing, but not about the car. She had to know if they were doing the right thing by divorcing. She knew what her own feelings were, but how did her husband feel about it? Did he want to continue with the divorce? Did he still love her? She decided the only way to find out was to ask. Brett, do you still love me? Come on, Terry. We've been over this. No. We haven't. We talked about how our lives have taken different directions. We talked about our different interests. We talked about how to get through life without each other. Hell, we talked about everything except how we still feel about each other. Before this divorce happens, I need to know, do you still love me? Since Brett made the decision to divorce, there have been many nights where he sat in his apartment pining for lost love. In a couple of years, he and Terry had gone from a loving married couple to two people living apart in the same house. They rarely quarreled, but there was no spark left. One evening, Terry brought up the subject of divorce. She said she thought it was time for them both to live their own lives. He'd agreed then, but since then, he'd realized he'd made a terrible mistake. He missed her like hell. He still loved her, but it was too late. Soon, the divorce would be final. She'd already had a few dates that he knew of, maybe more. She had already moved on, so what should he do? Embarrass himself by admitting he still loved her? Would he really humiliate himself to give her such pleasure? Was this the price he had to pay to get his car? Heck, he'd always been honest with her before the divorce. Should he be any less honest with her now? Terry, I sometimes think that, well, that maybe we're making a mistake, but I know how you feel. Damn it, Brett, stop telling me how I feel. It's obvious from our conversation that you have no idea how I feel, she said firmly. Oh, really? Okay then. How you feel? I love you. Those words took his breath away. For the first time in a long time, his heart seemed to skip a beat. Do you love me? He repeated with a smile. Yes, Brett. I still love you. But you're dating. People say you're getting on with your life. You are. Who? What people? Have you been spying on me? No. Of course not. But well, people. People we both know, friends, you know, they told me you were dating, that you were already looking for someone new. They advised me to do the same. Terry sighed, frustrated with their friends. Why did people always have to meddle in the affairs of others? What was the purpose of her running to them with everything she did? Yes. I dated a little, very little. I went on 3 dates with 3 different guys. She could see it in his face, a question she knew he wouldn't ask, but one that needed to be answered. No, Brett, I didn't sleep with any of them. I won't say I wasn't tempted because I was. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that 5 months is a long time, and to tell you the truth, before each date, I thought there was a good chance I'd bring them home, but she took another sip of coffee and lowered her head thoughtfully. She wanted to say her next statement so that it would mean something, so that he would know she was sincere. But by the end of each date, I didn't want to fuck any of them anymore. In fact, after the 3rd date, I realized that there was only one man I wanted in my bed. She looked into his eyes. It's you, Brett. You're the only man I want in my bed. Brett could hardly believe his ears. He had dreamed of them being together again, but he didn't really think it would ever happen. He was sure he had lost her forever. And then a thought hit him. Did she really mean she wanted to stay married, or was she offering me friends with benefits? He had to clarify. You mean you don't want to get divorced? A wide smile stretched across her face. I think we should sleep on it and talk more in the morning. What do you think? She was right about one thing. 5 months was a long time. He still wasn't sure what she was suggesting. All he knew for sure was that she was offering him sex, a chance to make love to her again, and he wasn't about to turn it down. Brett followed his wife into the bedroom. Yes. She was still his wife. At least for a while longer. He was going to make love to her as his wife. As they approached the bed, he turned and looked into her eyes. There was a desire there that he hadn't seen in a long time. Together, they brought their lips close and kissed. It wasn't the tongue-twisting, excited, lustful kiss they had done before their wedding, but the loving tender kiss of the days when their love was at its peak. Terry slowly unbuttoned his shirt. And after a few moments stripped him naked. Brett climbed into bed and walked as the love of his life performed a teasing strip-tease in his honor. When he saw that she was wearing the bra and panties he had bought for her for the special occasion, he realized that all the talk about the car was nothing more than a way to lure him there, to seduce him. He felt just like the very first time they had made love. He was beyond eager. As soon as she lay down next to him, he rolled over and wrapped his arms around her. He held her tightly against him as his lips kissed, sniffed and nibbled her face, neck, and ears. It had been so long ago, not just the 5 months since they'd broken up, but the couple years before that. How could they let their love fade so much? They both slept more soundly that night than they had ever slept since the word divorce was first uttered. Brett heard the joyous singing of a bird outside the bedroom window. He opened his eyes toward the morning sun. For a moment he looked up at the white ceiling and realized he was in his own home. This wasn't a dream, he thought. This was really happening. He looked around and saw his wife staring at him intently. A wide smile graced her beautiful face. "Good morning, handsome," she whispered. "Good morning, beautiful," he replied with an equally wide smile. She clung to him as he pulled her tighter against his body. "We will share the continent," he said. What? Her heart suddenly dropped. Was he still thinking of divorcing her? Yes. "I'll teach you how to drive a car and you can drive it sometimes and I'll drive it sometimes." He looked back and saw the frightened expression on her face. He kissed her encouragingly. "I'll teach you how to drive on one condition. Never ever mention the word divorce again, not now, not ever." He felt the tension in her body disappear. "You'll do fine, big boy," she promised. "Okay, I'll call the lawyer first thing tomorrow and tell him it's off." Terry decided that a simple thank you was not the way to show her appreciation. Brett closed his eyes. He sank into ecstasy. She was using everything in her arsenal to give him the ultimate pleasure. They had plenty of time that Sunday to not make love, as they needed to get some of his clothes. That night, they both renewed their vows. They held hands, looked into each other's eyes, and swore their loyalty, love, honor, and respect. They vowed to never take each other for granted again and to work on their marriage every day. They both knew how close they were to losing what was most precious to them and were determined to never let it happen again. On Monday, Terry was going to have lunch with her best friend Audrey. Audrey was pleased to see a smile on her friend's face for the first time in months. "Judging by that grin, did your little trick with the car work?" she asked cheerfully. "Like a spell," Terry replied, brightening as she sat down. "What did he say?" "That he loved me," she replied. "He's going to call a lawyer today and stop the divorce." "Oh, Terry, that's wonderful." "Audrey, I've tried and tried to figure out how we ever got to the point of divorce, but I just can't. I think we just got bored with each other for a while. Maybe we needed that to wake up. You know what they say? You don't know what you have until you lose it. Well, I'm glad you both realized that before you lost it." "Yeah. Me too," Terry replied with relief. "I don't understand why you used the car, though. Why didn't you just call him and tell him you wanted to talk about the divorce?" "Because I wasn't sure how he felt. I didn't know if he still loved me or not. If I had called him and told him I wanted to discuss divorce, he probably would have just blown me off, and I wanted to talk to him in person. I knew the best way to hedge against him not showing up was to threaten to leave his car." "Well, I couldn't be happier for you, Terry." "Thanks, Audrey. But tell me, if things didn't work out, if Brett said he wanted a divorce, would you keep the car?" "Are you kidding me? I would never take that car away from him. It's his baby. I could never hurt the man I love like that, even if he didn't love me back." Epilogue. Brett and Terry kept their vows. They worked on their marriage every day. They didn't have a date night once a month, but whenever they felt like it. Sometimes it consisted of dinner and dancing or a show, sometimes it was the theater, and sometimes they just parked by the lake and made out in the back seat of the Continental. They also experimented in the bedroom. They read sexy articles together, bought toys and X-rated movies. They had fun with sex, but it was different than making love. They did that too. 3 years after their reconciliation, Brett's mother passed away. Both he and Terry took care of all the funeral arrangements, and she never left his side during the whole ordeal. A couple weeks after the funeral, they were getting her house in order to sell. Terry was going through papers, receipts, and old documents his mother had kept over the years while Brett packed up the family heirlooms. "Brett," she called out from the bedroom. "Can you get me the registration card from the Continental, please?" "A registration card for what? I just wanna check something out," she replied. A couple minutes later, Brett handed his wife the Continental's registration number. "Honey, you know how you always say the car looks just like your dad's, right?" "Yes," he replied, still a little embarrassed. "Well, you're wrong. It's not just the same," she said, holding up the registration card to another piece of paper. "It's the same one." He questioned what he thought his wife had just said. "Look, darling. Your mother kept the registration number of your father's all these years, they're the same." Brett took both papers from her hands and compared them. She was right. The license plates were the same. His knees went a little weak, and he had to sit down on the bed next to his wife. "You once told me there was something about Continental that made you want it. I always thought it was just because it reminded you of your father, but it was more than that, darling. I really think it was your father who led you to that car. It was his way of reconnecting with you." On their way back to Illinois, they stopped at a cemetery. Remnants of flowers were still scattered around his mother's freshly dug burial site. Nearby was his father's old, but well-maintained grave. Brett hugged his loving wife and said in awe, "Look, Dad," he said, nodding at the Continental Park just a few feet away. "I remember how much you love this car, and I promise to take good care of it. I hope you know how much happiness and joy it brought Terry and me." He paused to wipe a tear from his eye. "Take care of Mom. She loved you and honored your memory until the day you two were reunited." He and Terry looked at each other. She wrapped her arms around him, laid her head on his chest and hugged him. "I love you so much, Brett. I love you too, darling," he said, resting his cheek gently against the top of her head.